The lights of Hollywood never dim, not even for grief. Cameras keep rolling, agents keep calling, and silence, true silence, is rare. But tonight, there was something different in the air. The comedy world had gone quiet, not for a punchline, not for a scandal, but for loss. Inside a small studio in Atlanta, the hum of production lights buzzed low. Katt Williams sat in a dim chair, his frame smaller than usual, shoulders tight, face not painted in satire but heavy with weight. Across from him, Monique leaned forward, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Not as an actress or comic, but as a sister in pain. There were no scripts, no applause signs, no handlers whispering from off stage. It's just the two of them and a camera that knew not to interrupt. Katt's voice, normally quick and defiant, cracked as it opened. People think you can't miss someone who is private, that if they weren't in your circle, your grief ain't valid. But Malcolm was in 1,000 circles. He paused, eyes blinking hard. We knew each other since we was teenagers in the back corners of green rooms nobody remembers. He wasn't loud, wasn't flashy. But when that brother entered a room, the noise knew to hush. Monique nodded silently, lips pressed in a thin line. She didn't speak for a long beat. And when she did, it wasn't performative. It was personal. I remember seeing him on set once. It wasn't even my scene. I wasn't in the episode. But I sat off stage just to watch him move. To watch a black man navigate Hollywood without losing his spine or his soul. Her voice trembled but did not break. He didn't chase attention. He didn't sell out, and that made some people uncomfortable. But it made me proud. The studio remained still. Not a creak. Not a cough. The silence wasn't awkward. It was sacred. Katt leaned forward, elbows on his knees now. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in a day. You know, he said quietly. Malcolm called me once, late. It was maybe 2 a.m. I thought it was a pocket dial. But he stayed on the line, didn't say much, just ... You all right, brother? I said, yeah. We hung up. That was it. He let the moment hang. That was Malcolm. He never needed the last word. Needed to make sure you were breathing. Wiped her eye, but didn't turn from the camera. This industry don't teach you how to mourn, she said. We learn how to brand, how to clap back, how to trend. But it don't teach you how to sit in pain, or how to honor the ones who didn't scream when they were hurting. A soft exhale escaped her lips. I didn't get to say goodbye. The weight of that sentence hit hard. Even Katt's chin dropped. The two comedians, so often misunderstood, so often labeled difficult or controversial, sat not as headlines, but as humans. When the camera panned out, the scene wasn't about fame. It was about finality. Malcolm-Jamal, Warner hadn't trended in the tabloids. He didn't dominate red carpets, but the people who knew him, really knew him, carried his absence like a collapsed star, heavy, quiet, unshakable. And for the first time in a long time, Katt and Monique weren't trying to make us laugh. They were showing us how to grieve. The camera cuts to a quiet studio, dimly lit and respectful in tone. Monique sits with a tissue in hand, trying to maintain composure. Her voice trembles slightly as she speaks about the deep friendship and mutual respect she shared with Malcolm-Jamal Warner. She recounts how his quiet wisdom and fierce loyalty made him one of the rare, grounded souls in the industry. She recalls the long phone calls they had after shows and how he always ended with, "Protect your peace." Katt Williams, standing beside her, nods slowly. He then steps forward and addresses the audience directly, speaking from a place of both anger and heartbreak. He criticizes the entertainment industry for only giving people their flowers when they're gone. This man was a giant, he says, and too many ignored that until today. There's a heaviness in his tone, not performative but raw, the kind that lingers. He details how Malcolm had been dealing with private battles, emotional and spiritual ones that he never broadcast publicly. Monique quietly adds that Malcolm once confided in her about feeling like the world had moved on from actors who stood for dignity and truth. The studio falls silent. There's no applause, no background music, just grief, just memory, just truth. Katt lowers his head for a moment, gathering himself, before continuing. He speaks of the last time he saw Malcolm just a few months ago at a private gathering. He says Malcolm was calm, reserved as always, but something in his eyes felt distant. He smiled, but it didn't reach all the way. Katt says, his voice tightening. Monique wipes a tear and whispers that she noticed it too. They both agree that Malcolm carried the weight of being a black man in Hollywood with silent grace, never loud, never bitter, always dignified, Monique recalls. How Malcolm avoided the spotlight when it wasn't necessary, preferring substance over spectacle. She recounts how he once told her, "Legacy isn't built in headlines, it's built in how you treat people when no one's watching." The room absorbs her words like a final sermon. Katt then shifts the conversation to the industry's pattern of overlooking artists like Malcolm until their absence forces remembrance. He calls it intentional neglect, a system that quietly sidelines brilliance until it's too late. Monique nods, holding her chest, saying that losing Malcolm feels like losing a chapter of their shared history, one that won't be rewritten. Neither of them speaks for a long beat. The silence is thick, but it speaks volumes. The conversation drifts into memory, but with each passing second, the weight in the room grows heavier. Katt leans forward, eyes fixed on the table, as he starts to recall the early days, when he and Malcolm would cross paths on set lots, backstage at awards, or during interviews where the unspoken bond between black entertainers was often the only armor they had. He talks about Malcolm's presence, not loud, never boastful but always commanding, the kind of presence that made you sit straighter, speak truer. Monique chimes in, her voice trembling, saying that Malcolm was one of the rare few who never changed to fit the room. The room changed for him, she says. They share a bittersweet laugh, remembering how Malcolm would quietly correct reporters when they got something wrong, or how he'd pull a younger actor aside to offer quiet, life-saving advice without ever expecting credit. Katt's tone grows more intense as he reflects on how the world didn't understand, how heavy it was to be Malcolm-Jamal Warner, forever seen through the lens of a role he played as a child, while the man he became stood unnoticed in plain sight. He talks about the heartbreak of seeing someone so gifted forced to shrink just to be allowed into rooms he should have been headlining. Monique places a hand on Katt's shoulder and says he wasn't chasing fame, he was chasing meaning. And then there's silence again, longer, this time deeper. The kind of silence that only comes when two souls realize they're now carrying someone else's legacy. They both look off camera, eyes glassy, and for a moment, neither of them is performing. They are just two friends, mourning a third. Katt exhales slowly, a tremble caught somewhere between grief and gratitude, and his voice breaks the silence, like a prayer. You know what hurts most? He was still giving, still pouring into everybody else, even when nobody was checking to see if his cup was empty. Monique nods, her lips pressed tight, eyes heavy with the kind of pain that doesn't come from loss alone, but from knowing how preventable some losses are. She whispers, "We wait too long to celebrate our legends until they're gone." Her words echo in the quiet studio like a verdict. Katt's eyes flicker to the camera for the first time, his voice steady but raw. "This industry," he says, "it'll clap for you at your funeral before it calls to check on you when you're alive." He isn't bitter, he's pleading with a system that eats its artists and a culture that sometimes forgets to feed the ones who fed it. Monique begins to speak, her voice carrying the rhythm of a sermon, not loud but firm. He was brilliance wrapped in humility. He never let his pain become a performance, and maybe that's why so many people missed how deep it ran. Katt leans back, eyes glazed, and mutters, "He walked like he was holding everybody else up." Monique nods again, slowly, and says, "But who was holding him?" And with that, the grief becomes more than just a memory. becomes a mirror. One that reflects every overlooked artist, every unsung genius, every quiet warrior who gave everything and asked for nothing. Monique wipes the corner of her eye, her fingers trembling slightly, but her voice grows stronger, steadier, like a lighthouse in a storm. He never made noise about the things he carried, she says. But I saw it. I saw the cracks in his laughter, the weight behind his jokes. Comedy was his shield, but he was bleeding behind it. Katt looks down, hands clasped tightly, as if trying to hold together something that's been broken too long. Because he made us feel safe, he murmurs. Like even when the world was burning, he'd throw a line, flip the script, and suddenly you forgot your pain. But where did his pain go? The question hangs heavy, unanswered, unanswerable. Camera zooms in slightly. Catching the rawness on their face is not just grief, but guilt. Guilt for not seeing sooner. Guilt for assuming the strong ones didn't need saving. Monique continues, her voice thick but unwavering. He showed up for everyone. Birthdays, court cases, benefit shows. He gave without asking. And now he's gone, and we're all scrambling to remember the things we should have told him when he was still breathing. Katt nods silently, then leans forward, staring dead into the lens. Give people their flowers, not petals at their funeral. Give them full bouquets while they can still smell them. Monique reaches for his hand, and in that silent gesture is a storm of regret. Love and a promise. To remember, to honor, and never let another one go unseen. The screen slowly fades to black as their hands remain joined, a still image of unity forged through grief and belated understanding. Then, the silence is interrupted by the soft creak of a door opening, and the shot cuts to a dimly lit hallway. It's backstage at a comedy club in Atlanta, and a mural of legends lost Bernie. Mac, Robin Harris, Paul Mooney lines the corridor like watchful ancestors. Monique walks slowly past it, trailing her fingers along the painted faces. Katt follows, but stops halfway, eyes fixed on an unfinished space at the end of the wall. A blank canvas. "This one's his," he says quietly. "They all ready?" "No." Monique turns, her expression filled with sorrow and reverence. He never needed to be the loudest. He just needed to be heard. Katt lights a cigarette, the tip glowing like a tiny heartbeat in the dark. "He carried us, Mo. While we were chasing spotlights, he was holding up the whole damn building." She looks at him, tears glistening. "And we didn't even say, thank you." They fall into silence again, the kind that aches with the things left unsaid. Then, from a distance, they hear faint laughter recording playing on loop from the main room. His voice, his punchline, that unmistakable cadence. It's not just a recording, it's a resurrection. Monique walks toward the sound. "Let them hear him," she says, "one more time." And as they step through the door and into the room filled with echoes, the screen fades not to black, but to a glowing tribute of footage, memories, and moments he gave the world while asking for nothing in return. The footage rolls grainy at first. Then clearer, his voice rising like a sermon through the speakers. It's a clip from a forgotten set in Detroit, early 2000s. No glitz. No big production. Just him on a wooden stage. Sweat shining on his forehead, mic cord wrapped around his wrist like a lifeline. He's telling a story about growing up poor, about his grandmother's mismatched shoes, about the time he wore bread bags as socks just to survive a winter walk to school. But the audience isn't laughing at him, they're laughing with him. Because of him. It's making their pain feel familiar, manageable, even sacred. Each word lands like a bomb, a confession wrapped in a punchline. Back in the present, the crowd is silent, eyes glassy, chests tight. They're not here for entertainment anymore. They're here to remember. A young comedian in the back, no older than 20, wipes, his face inspired not by fame but by truth. Katt and Monique sit in the wings watching the crowd absorb the real legacy. Not the Instagram quotes, not the Twitter clips, But the man who turned silence into thunder and left behind more than jokes, he left instructions. Instructions on how to be real, how to hold your ground, how to speak even when your voice trembles. The final clip ends, the lights dim, and the crowd unprompted begins to rise. Not in applause, but in tribute. No ovation. It's just a room full of people standing in gratitude. Katt leans over to Monique and whispers, "We were wrong about what legacy means." She nods, holding his gaze. It ain't about who shouts your name. It's about who remembers your truth. And in that moment, as the screen goes dark, and the theater hums with reverence, the world begins to understand. He never needed the spotlight. He was the light. Outside the theater, the city hums with its usual chaos horns. Distant sirens, neon flickers on damp pavement. But something in the air has shifted. People exit quietly, some arm in arm, others alone, but all of them changed. No one checks their phones. No one rushes. For once, time slows. The younger comics hang back near the marquee, staring up at his name in lights, not as fans, but as students. They're not asking how to be famous anymore. They're asking how. To be true? An old man in a faded hoodie walks by, pauses and mutters, "That man made me laugh through a divorce. 3 jobs and a war one never asked for." He doesn't wait for a response. He just keeps walking, nodding once to the sky. Inside, the crew begins to shut things down. But Katt remains seated in the front row, staring at the stage like it's a church altar. He doesn't speak. He doesn't need to. Monique joins him, holding a worn envelope in her hand. "He left this with me," she says quietly, voice trembling. "Told me not to open it till the last laugh was done." Katt looks at her, then back to the stage. "You open it." She hesitates, then tears it gently, like the paper might be sacred. Inside, a single piece of stationery, handwritten in that unmistakable scrawl. No jokes, no bit. Just a message. Tell the truth, even when it's ugly. Be louder than fear. And never forget, some people need your story to breathe. They read it twice. Then again. The words don't just land, they settle, like dust in an empty chapel. Outside, rain begins to fall. Not heavy. Just enough to remind everyone they're alive. In a small comedy club across town, the mic stand waits, untouched. A young woman, nervous, shaking, walks up, adjusts the mic. She doesn't say her name, she just speaks. A story, raw and jagged, about her father, addiction, redemption, and the first time she made him laugh again. The crowd leans in. And in the back corner, a man with tear-filled eyes listens silently, then nods. Legacy has already begun its echo. Backstage at a quiet Atlanta venue. Monique sat beside Katt Williams, her voice low but firm as she reflected on the countless private moments that Malcolm had guarded with quiet dignity, never once using pain as currency in the public eye. Katt, with his eyes rimmed red, nodded as he recalled the final phone call Malcolm made to him, a message not of fear or regret, but one filled with clarity and urgency about setting the record straight before silence overtook him for good. Meanwhile, fans flooded social media with candlelit vigils and handwritten tributes. Many posting personal stories of how Malcolm's roles shaped their identity and made them feel seen. But underneath that collective mourning was a growing storm, a sense that Malcolm's story was being stripped down to headlines and cold statements. Devoid of the warmth and complexity he carried with him, Monique's voice broke slightly as she read aloud a note Malcolm had once passed her during a bet, taping one sentence. Written in his slanted hand, "They won't protect us, so we protect each other." That memory sparked something in Katt, who stood up mid-interview and declared that he and Monique would finish what Malcolm started. Not for clout. Not for views, but to preserve the soul of a man who had given everything to a world that often refused to give back. The night of the tribute arrived under a sky heavy with rain, as if the city itself was mourning. Inside the venue, a hush fell over the room when the lights dimmed out a sound from the hundreds in attendance, only the quiet hum of anticipation and grief. The stage was simple, a single chair, a flickering screen behind it, and a microphone. Standing alone in the center. Then, without introduction, Monique stepped into the light. Her dress was black, her expression carved from resolve. She didn't speak right away. Instead, she pulled out Malcolm's old journal, the one he carried. Through every tour, every shoot, every low moment, Hollywood never saw. Her voice, when it finally emerged, was trembling but deliberate as she read passages he'd written about fear, about pride, about surviving in a business that chewed up quiet brilliance and spat it out for not playing the game. The room was still as Katt Williams walked out beside her, holding nothing but a folded piece of paper, a statement Malcolm had written in the final days. Addressed not to the industry, not even to his fans, but to his fellow actors, the invisible, the overlooked. Katt read it without flair, his voice cracking only once. Tell the truth, even when it burns your name. This world will forget your wins, but never your backbone. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was reverent, thick with truth. And it lingered as the lights went dark once more, leaving behind only the echo of a man's voice who refused to be edited down to silence.